Welcome, everyone, to the Men's Show. I am here with 5 other incredible guys, and we are going to be having conversations that matter. And we're going to just be guys, and we're going to pursue the Lord together. But for now, let's roll that intro.
So you can support all the programs and all the shows here at AWAKEN Catholic. Join the AWAKEN Nation. Go to awakencatholic.org, and you can make a one-time or a monthly donation, and that helps everything that you see here possible. So if you like what you see, that's the way you can support us. Another way you can support us is by downloading the Hallow app through the AWAKEN Catholic website. It's a free prayer app, and it's awesome. My wife uses it every night. I know lots of people who say it just added so much peace to their day. And it's a free app, but there's also a premium version. You can get a free month by going to our website and accessing the app through there. You can also go to hallow.app/awaken.
Oh, Mr. Tenney, you are so good with words. Thank you for sharing those inspirational messages with us. Yeah. So we are here. We're a bunch of dudes that just kind of, we don't have all the answers. We don't have everything figured out, but we know that we love Jesus, and all we want, each of us, is to pursue the Lord the best we can according to the church and the church that Christ instituted. And we don't have everything figured out. We're not perfect, but we are just trying. And each of us kind of comes from a different area of passion and expertise. One of us is a priest. I'm not going to spoil it and tell you which one. Okay, there he is. But why don't we just begin by going around and introducing ourselves. So my name is Nick Torre. I'm the president of AWAKEN Catholic, and I am just super stoked to be finally doing this.
So where do I look when I'm speaking?
You could look right into that camera.
Okay, great. My name is Peter Angel. I'm the director of the Office for Life and Justice of Catholic Charities in the Diocese of Toledo. But most important, I'm a husband and father of 3 kids.
My name is Mike Tenney. I'm the guy from out of town. I'm from Washington, D.C., and I am a Catholic speaker and worship leader and father, husband. MikeTenneymusic.com if you want to know more.
Yeah, John Mark Grodi. I'm married, father of 5 kids. I'm the chief operating officer at the Coming Home Network International. I'm the host of Elevate Ordinary along with my wife here on AWAKEN Catholic, and just happy to be part of this men's night.
I'm Father Jeff Walker. I'm a priest for the Diocese of Toledo and currently the pastor of St. Thomas More University Parish at the campus of Bowling Green State University.
And I'm Rob Holler. I'm a business manager for a parish in Perrysburg, Ohio, St. Rose. I'm a realtor. I'm a husband and a father of a 2-year-old, and I probably do not belong here with you.
You belong.
Awesome. Thank you, gentlemen. And thank you for your yes to being here. One of the tenets of what we're trying to do is have challenging conversations about challenging topics. And, by virtue of that, understandably, there was some reservation. There was some fear of being exposed and talking about some of these difficult things that generally our society is like, no, do not touch those topics. Some of the topics, there is just a very real dynamic of the fact that we are men, but we also, we are men who love our women. We love our wives. We build up our wives. We edify. We do have all of us have multiple wives. Yes.
We love our specific.
Some of us don't have any.
Bride the church.
That's right.
We're already in trouble.
So we are in trouble. This is exactly what everyone's afraid of.
It's been very quiet so far.
So we're going to begin. We're going to try to cover a separate topic for each episode. We're going to begin with just a very simple question. If this is the men's show, what does it mean to be a man? Obviously, for us as men, each of us kind of identify greatly with our individual vocations. And so for most of us, we're husbands first. Father, you are a priest first and foremost, but what does it really mean to be a man in a world that is trying to, in a world in which it is harder to identify a positive version of masculinity, or a world in which it's getting more complicated to be proud of being a man because of the ways in which ideas are being posited right now. So I want to throw it out there And if anyone has any initial, John Mark's like, as soon as I ask the question, he's like dying to. So I also want to highlight John Mark John Mark is a philosopher, and he cares a lot about words, and understandably he's right. Like what a word means, what the word is means, has implications on a question and on the definition of something. So I know that Pete has something he wants to share. Why don't we begin with John Mark? He's going to maybe bring some clarity about the question, and then we can move to Pete after that.
I don't have any clarity to bring here, Nick. I have only distinctions and more murkiness. That's one of those questions. It's like, where would you want to go with that? You want to talk biologically? You want to talk psychologically? You want to talk about it in terms of human nature, that what God made us? Do you want to talk about it in terms of the ideal that we believe as Catholics that we're called to? There's a million ways you can go with that. So you got to start by determining which direction you want to talk about first. You brought up the way that masculinity is often talked about or seen in the modern world, and we're usually looking at, epiphenomenal, surface level things and arguing about those. What men should or shouldn't do or don't do. A lot of labels are applied: toxic this, toxic that. We as Catholics, in particular, we start from natural law, human nature, that we were created, and we were created as men and women for a purpose. We were created to image God in a certain way, and there's something about us being men and humans being men and women that images God in a very particular way. There's a lot of overlap between men and women. That kind of gets lost in these debates. It's either men are just like women or they're completely different. No, there's a lot of overlap psychologically, biologically, at all levels. Certainly a lot of overlap in terms of what we're called to. We're called to be holy. We're called to be saints. But there are specific qualities of masculinity that God gave to us, that specific purposes that we have beyond the obvious biological ones. So.
Now, listen, I have a clarification. We were supposed to take a drink every time someone says epiphenomenal. Was that the word?
That is the drinking game.
Epiphenomenal. Yeah.
Right.
If you want to join in,
to let the philosophers.
if you want to join in at home, take a drink anytime John Mark says epiphenomenal.
Crap, I'm going to have to
Fit it in anywhere.
That is the only drink you will be taking.
Right.
I like what you had to say about how there's a lot of overlap and it's not necessarily exclusive. Like I think of a Venn diagram with a lot of overlap in the middle, because if we talk about, kind of in stereotypes, women are more emotional or men are more aggressive. Like I know women that are more aggressive than me, and I'm more emotional than some women. But so, and I think it's important to distinguish that you're talking in stereotypes, and that doesn't mean that any individual that doesn't fall into that is like bad. In that when we're talking about what is manly or masculine or feminine, that a lot of times we're talking descriptively, not prescriptively. We're talking in a way that is, this is what we often observe with men, not you are a bad man unless you fit this, and women cannot be like this, which is a lot of times what people hear. And so when I think about it, when I talk with people about that, that's a distinction I make in my own mind.
Yeah. That's so huge. I love that.
And we cast it in terms of virtues, like good qualities about someone. Again, those are not masculine or feminine qualities. They look differently as for men and women. I mean, there are great women leaders who lead well. That looks different for a man to lead as for a woman to lead. Courage looks different in the context of a woman versus a man. But those are qualities we all share, we all strive to. But there's a particular way that that it looks as a man. I don't know.
Pete, what were you going to throw in there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, but we also believe that men and women are distinct, right? And they're complementary, so we don't lose that either. Although there's that overlap, there is a distinction between the two. And I know that you guys aren't saying that, but when you asked the question, I mean, what came to my mind is, one, we should just read from the Catechism rather than discuss it. But I guess that's the point of the show. So, but the idea or the answer that came to my mind was to look at the first man that was created through divine revelation, to look at Adam, and then the man, Jesus Christ, who is emblematic of what man should be. So man, by his very nature, or her very nature, is son or daughter, because each and every one of us comes from two parents, a mom and a dad. And so immediately man is connected to another. So man is never alone because man has to come from some place. So man is son. And then from the new Adam, Christ, man is disciple, because God comes to earth and he says, follow me. So man, again, is not alone. He's called to follow the master. He's called to follow God. And then lastly, man is given a mission. So first man, Adam, was given the mission to till and to guard. So you could say warrior, you could say priest, because I think the Hebrew word that was used in Genesis is the same word that was given to Adam, is the same word given to the priest when they're talking about carrying the temple. So man is son, disciple, and then warrior or priest. He has something to do, and that doing is the sanctification. It's getting to heaven. So I think those three categories have helped me understand, appreciate my own life. Like I'm called to be son, just to receive the love of my parents, and in particular the love of the Father. I'm called to be disciple, I'm called to follow Jesus wherever he goes. And then warrior, I've got a job to do, and that's to sanctify, to bring my family home to heaven, and to sanctify this world as well.
And what stands out to me about that is there are elements of what it is to be a man, what it is to be a woman that are divinely instituted, that were put there by God as he designed us. And then there are parts in our society, in all world societies over history, there are parts of what it is to be a man and what it is to be a woman that are kind of evolved organically, that are not explicitly from God. And so, one example of that, right? No such thing in the book of Genesis as this idea of makeup. And we see in Egyptian culture that men and women wore makeup. But in our American 2020 culture, women wear makeup, men don't, except if you want to be like some edgy punk, and I don't mean punk like in a derogatory sense, I mean like a cultural sense.
Billy Joe Armstrong.
Right. So culturally, there are things that evolve organically that attribute to one gender or the other, but it is not something that is intrinsically so, right? Like if I was to wear eyeliner today.
Can we?
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you wear makeup?
Yeah, this whole show is about Nick justifying his desire.
No, but like, I don't. But sometimes for like a photo shoot or videos or something, I might. And in Hollywood, any movies, everyone's wearing makeup, right? Like, so there are certain things that culturally, Father, you're struggling with this, or
No, I'm fine.
your face was like, wow.
Well, no, I was sort of, because I was thinking about what John Mark said again, and that always makes my face like scrunch up a little bit.
I understand.
That it depends on how you want to talk about manhood. So there are all of these cultural things, as you say, which are very fluid as time and space changes. But then something that's much more intrinsic. So yeah, I think when you get to those accidental properties, when you get to those culturally based things, I don't think you're going to get a real robust understanding of what it means to be a man, or what it means to be a woman, or what it means to be a human, because those aren't the things that define us.
And there's such a massive danger in intermeshing what is intrinsically true about man and woman and what is culturally, temporarily true about man and woman.
Can I just talk about that?
Yeah.
On that point, one of the things that I love that you said, Pete, is how man is meant for relationship, and that we have these relationships of son, I forget all the things you said, but in the book of Genesis, what does God say to Adam when he sees him? He says, it's not good for the man to be alone. And he finds a suitable partner for him. And if I know John Paul II talks about the Hebrew words that are used before Eve is created, he uses the word Adam, which is Adam. It means mankind. But then after Eve is created, he uses the word for male. And so it's almost like Adam doesn't even have manliness until he's in relationship with
Interesting.
Eve. And why
it's so difficult to define manhood in the abstract, because it's always in relationship.
And to your point, Father, one of the things that I've found so hard about being a man in our society and our culture is there's this one man, one desire, lone wolf. Don't talk about your feelings, like do everything by yourself. And I'm like one of the biggest extroverts I know. And so when I dig into scripture and find that, no, I'm meant for relationship. I am a beloved son. I am a protector. I am a husband, in some sense, a warrior. Like that helps me rise above that cultural masculinity that isn't real masculinity. Some might even call it toxic masculinity, to find true, authentic masculinity that's based on the scriptures, that's based on Christ.
Yeah, it has to be defined in terms of its end. It's the teleology there. That you're meant for relationship. You're meant for these specific relationships, and it's only in relation to those relationships that the specific biological and psychological differences get their meaning. I mean, again, by and large, there's some Venn diagram going on here, but by and large, men are bigger and stronger than women.
Can we get a definition on that?
No, actually,
stronger.
Actually, what we're going to have to do is expand the drinking game.
Tea leaveology?
Purposeful.
Any word John Mark throws out there that the average Joe's not going to understand, we drink.
Okay.
It means
What did he say that was bad?
Teleology.
I don't know what that means.
telos. It's purpose. It's end.
I learned that by watching Last Man Standing. I don't know what you've been.
So like,
Did you get it?
Yeah.
the telos of the
I don't
eye.
want it though.
Joke's on you, Rob.
So like the telos of the eye is to see.
Yeah.
The telos of the hand is to like grab and manipulate things.
Yeah.
And
Tell us about it.
yeah, and so scripture, so scripture and the church would say this, the telos of the man is
All those things.
All those things.
Husband, father, son, and the things that go along with those different.
Well, you see, I think the order here matters. So Pete was right and Nick was wrong. So Nick, when you started this whole thing off, that was my first thought was, okay, Nick's got that wrong. Because you said first and foremost, you are husbands.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
And I think the order matters there.
You're
Because you don't
absolutely
know
right.
what it means to be a husband or a father until your first son.
Yes.
And so Pete says the first identity of man is son, that you
Absolutely.
came from somewhere, and the relationship with your parents, with the people who put you here, or in a spiritual sense with God the Father, to know God as Father.
That's so
and
huge.
then after son, you become brother, and then husband, and then father. And to really have a full understanding of each one of those masculine identities, that order, there's overlap, but that order is important.
yeah.
Because you can't be a father unless you know what it means to be a son.
Yeah.
Man,
Preach.
I love that.
I do.
And so, full time. Yeah, and I think what I was getting at about the danger too in intermeshing these, the different sources of developing the identity and the attributes and stuff. The danger is like the moment that you say to a little boy who is curious about something as silly as makeup or like a preference for one set of colors versus another set, the moment you tell him, don't be like a girl, don't be a girl, or like the moment you start to say those things, you are putting in his head that he isn't as much a boy. And that is not fair because you're predisposing that person to gender confusion. It's totally, yes, Peter, you want to share your wrong opinion? Go ahead.
I'll let you finish. Go.
No, I think it's
Before I tear it apart.
but along the lines of what you're saying, Father, it's fundamentally important for Augustine to always know he's my son. And if he is interested in something that is a less than, masculine color, he's always my son, no matter what. And so, yes, Peter.
No, I'm not.
No, just go.
Well, I'm curious to go back. I think Michael said it in the beginning, like we talked about stereotypes. And we always reference stereotypes as if something that they're bad. And stereotypes, they're based upon something, right? And so we do have to go back to what John Mark also said about, all right, the men and women, the way that our bodies are made up. It's the way that we are naturally that lends itself to stereotypes. Now, it doesn't mean that every man needs to be this to be a man, but it does mean there is a baseline of reality that we have to acknowledge when it comes to the natural law by which we've been made. And so men are going to be, when it comes to physical ability, there's going to be a difference between what males and females can lift generally. We can't just dismiss and say, well, you're not masculine or feminine because you don't do this or that. But we acknowledge that those realities. So I was just over here.
But I think biological differences are different than a preference for color or type of music, or you know what I mean?
Well,
Culture. You're making a distinction between biological or even some of these intrinsic traits that more commonly are with a specific gender versus a cultural thing.
Exactly. And the moment that we confuse a child about their own gender because of different attributes that we're picking up on that have nothing to do with intrinsic things, like color, like music, like playing with dolls, like whatever, that moment we are doing a terrible disservice and injustice to that child. Because I was just hearing a story about these parents, full transition for their 3-year-old child. By the time they were 3, full transition. Because the parents decided, you know what? I'm noticing things that are more like this other thing, so we're going to go the distance with this. And the moment that you're basing that on these external, non-intrinsic things, extrinsic things, rather than the intrinsic things that we have already identified, like that's why you cannot intermesh these things. Like there are some things that are cultural, and to pretend that they're not is dangerous.
Can I throw another word out there?
Please.
So
We're ready with our drinks.
So better than stereotypes, the Christian relies on archetypes. So, so archetype is not a description of things that we commonly see. An archetype is an ideal to which we aspire. And so John Paul II talks about how every man is called to be father. Now, that doesn't mean every man has biological children.
Yes.
And I live out my fatherhood even before I was a father. There were ways in which I was pouring myself out for my students. There was a way I was pouring myself into my music for my listeners and those who appreciate art. And Father, maybe you can speak to like what does your fatherhood look like? We even call you Father.
Yeah. Right. Well, and you said it precisely there that this is a relational based identity, not even a biological based identity, because it's how you relate to these people who call you Father. And you're right that of course it has something to do with biological children, but when you think of Saint Joseph, right? Without, well, maybe he had biological children, maybe he didn't, but Jesus wasn't his biological child, but he was in a very real way father to Jesus. So it doesn't have to do with biology, it's that relationship. And as you said, every man is called to be father, every man is called to be husband. Every man is brother and every man is son. And it has little to do with how well you know your parents, whether you have siblings, whether you have a ring on your finger and you have biological children.
And that's why those external things, those passing things, you brought up like makeup or different like that, but I feel like it's a really complicated example for many reasons.
It is. It's just I don't know what else to point to.
Right, but
You guys aren't wearing makeup?
yeah, but those I forgot where I was going with that.
Sorry,
anyway,
I
yeah.
said a joke.
And maybe that's where I was getting a little lost, because I think the example itself, like, I think there's an overreaction now with our kids and our society. Like, kids are just naturally curious about things, right? And so you're not going to mess your kid up one way or another just by saying in one moment when they're looking at makeup, like, oh, that's for girls. Like, when my son John Paul starts putting high heels on, I'm like, John Paul, those are Gigi's, those are for girls. I'm not messing up my son for the rest of his life and making
because you responded as nicely as you did. But if you throw shame on him about that moment by the way that you present yourself, that's going to become something that's going to imprint differently in his psychology. If you do it as soberly as you just said it right now, it won't do that damage. But like the reason the makeup is a relevant example is because there have been cultures historically that men wore makeup and they were still manly men. And that's why it's such an obvious thing to me, because men have worn makeup and they have been manly, and there's nothing unmanly about that. It's just a cultural thing.
Well, one of the things I think that you're tapping on here, which is connected to this topic, which is precisely that men, boys, there's a particular way that boys, maybe even distinct from girls, they develop their personality as men from other men. That affirmation, from that construct. So really, the example you're bringing up a little bit is a slightly different topic. It's about how men relate to each other in this constructive way versus a destructive way. The criticism, which has a lot of maybe implications in there about societal stuff and different images of men, different stereotypes. But the larger issue here is the way that we as fathers or we as men relate to other men, especially younger men, in ways that are affirming them to build themselves up in virtue and in those roles that they're called to.
Yeah.
And we play an important role in all of the men in our life, in their lives, in terms of helping them to build that affirmation, that constructive, also that pushing a little bit, challenging each other as men. What's the scripture reference? The
iron sharpens iron.
There you go. Yeah.
That's beautiful. And that's actually a perfect segue to an important question as far as men relating to men and the impact that has on us.
Yeah.
No one, in terms of our masculinity or maleness, has impacted us more than our own fathers. And there are other people in a similar type of dynamic. And so I want to kind of throw this question out. What are failed examples of masculinity that we have observed in our own lives, and how has that impacted us? And we don't have to be specific in a way that would ruin a relationship or something, but I just mean, this is a very real challenge for men out there, because with our fathers, we really, we grow up, most of us, with our fathers as our heroes. And the moment that we start to detect, as we develop our frontal lobe and whatever, is the moment we started to detect, oh, they're not perfect, and they've been a hero to me, and I've always wanted to be like them, and they're starting to make mistakes. Am I going to make those same mistakes? And I just think that this is an important question. So yeah, what are some examples of ways in which, whether for you or someone the failed masculinity, like someone not living up to virtue, and how that's impacted us or people we know?
I can even go first. So there have been several prominent men in my life who have struggled with anger and just getting frustrated very easily and bubbling over and yelling and thank goodness I haven't ever suffered physical abuse from those men, and they were not physically abusive, but maybe borderline verbally abusive at some point. And I'm thinking of coaches, and I won't get more specific than that, but I know for me there was a decision very young, and I don't know how young I was, but in my heart was, I don't want to be like that. Yeah. And so I rarely get angry. And if I do get angry, it doesn't come out. And I think that's good that I don't let my anger get the best of me, and I don't lash out at people and that sort of thing. But it was also then a challenge for me to stand up for myself. Yeah. And especially two men that were kind of very aggressive and could be very sharp and stern. There are times as a grown man where another man has been stern with me, and I have to leave the room, and I'm crying, and I can't stop, which of course makes me feel even more like a man. And so there's something where I've had to really work on, you don't just back down when somebody's like that, but you don't respond with that same sort of uncalled for aggression. And so that's been a major thing of growth for me that I've had to work on, is how do I stand up for myself? How do I stand up for other people? How do I stand up for what's right in a way that is productive, in a way that is peaceful, in a way that is like Christ? And I'll use the word archetype again. There's that book, John Eldridge, Wild at Heart, that you were talking about. And there's some things I like about the book, and there's some things I don't. But the one key thing I remember that has helped me so much is that my model of manliness is Jesus. Yeah. And so reading the scriptures and reading those stories of, he's standing up to the Pharisees, and he's not intimidated at all. But yet he has such compassion for the woman at the well. He has such compassion for Zacchaeus hanging out in the tree. There's that has been my real model of manliness, for how to do confrontation, for how not to back away, for how to be a force for good, even a provocative force for good, but not be like a anger monster.
Well, what you do is you fashion a rope and you start whipping people and flipping tables.
I love the example, Mike, because again, anger, this ability to have your passion be put against an obstacle, that's something God-given.
Yeah,
that passion is not an evil thing, a bad thing. It's only evil and bad when it lacks order. It lacks its telos. It lacks its purpose. It's put toward its proper thing. And so the man who has no control over that, and it just comes out at stupid times, it's put to no good use. But when it's ordered, when it's tempered, it's able to be productive. For me, I think an example is that connects to that is, you or someone brought up earlier, the stereotypes around men and women in terms of emotionality and vulnerability. And there's, as you said, Pete, there's some truth to that. I think biologically we could even say that there's, we know as men, there's probably some reason, some purpose to us kind of being able to turn that off when it's time to go bring down a wildebeest because I got to feed the family. Put that in the box. I got to do this right now. And that there's probably a purpose to the reason that men have that sort of stereotype. There's probably some truth to it. But of course, the negative end of it, the untempered, the unordered end of it, is men who then live their whole lives in that stoic, invulnerable disconnectedness.
Yeah.
And we see that a lot in other examples of men. And if that's all you've ever seen, it's hard to get out of that, because that's not actually what you're made for either. That's to come down so that you can go into relationship, not just with your spouse and other people, but your God. He wants to be really in relation with you. He doesn't want to hear the pious, just stuff you repeat over and over. He wants to hear your heart. And so that's another example too, where that it's something that's given to us for a reason, but it too has to be ordered and tempered.
Well, and then that example is so interesting too, because some amount of that we've developed potentially, like you were insinuating, like out of a need for survival and out of a need for the, what we needed for hunting and stuff. But then some of that too is culturally, like, I was scolded as a child when I expressed emotion as a boy, not me, I'm saying like in a hypothetical, there are men who have been indoctrinated with this idea that you cannot express emotion. Right. I choose to not express or even feel emotion as a self-preservation technique because of my parents' divorce and stuff like that. That's a different thing. But
you choose not to feel emotion?
Oh, I will not. Like the show This Is Us, Rob has been trying to get me to watch This Is Us for years. Right. And every single time anybody recommends This Is Us, they say, oh, I cry every single time. And then I'm like, well, then why the hell are you watching it?
By the way, Jack Pearson, great example of good manliness.
Yeah, you should totally watch that show. Man.
Yeah.
I opened up. I want to hear other people's examples of.
Yeah, you got real with us. You got real.
This is actually for you.
It's an intervention. Jeez.
Well, I certainly think of the examples of priests in my life. And a lot of people ask me because they are also fathers whom, if you grow up in the church, as father from as early as you can remember. And people would ask me all the time when I was thinking about becoming a priest, they say, well, what priest inspired you to do this? And I would always say, none that I know.
Yeah.
And I mean, that sounds terrible about the priests that I knew growing up, but I also saw them as flawed people from the beginning as well. And it wasn't that I was trying to model my life after any one of them, but I was trying to model my life after Jesus Christ, right? It was God the Father who was calling me, not any particular priest of my formative years. And I think that's a super important thing, because when we talk about men who have disappointed us, I could list off the priests who have disappointed their spiritual children over the years.
And that's super relevant right now in our diocese.
Super relevant. And the shame that comes from knowing that someone else who is called father, who wears the same collar that I do, fell so far and so hard from their vocation, from their call to fatherhood. That has sort of been, sort of like you said, that has sort of been my motivation to be a good father or a good priest. When I entered the seminary, it was 2005. And I remember the local newspaper asked me, like, amidst all of the first round of this whole
oh my goodness
sexual abuse crisis. And they say, well, why are you becoming a priest with all of this going on? Because there are so many examples that are so prominent right now of terrible priests. And I remember saying to that reporter, I don't remember what I had for lunch last week, but I remember in 2005, I said to this reporter, well, they're not why I'm becoming a priest. In fact, I am more motivated now to show people that that's not what priesthood is about.
Well, that's beautiful.
Sort of like you said, I was determined when I was a father that I was not going to be an angry man. It's almost more motivation to seek virtue when you see how terrible vice is.
But I think that's the crisis we're facing as a culture and a nation today, is that we don't have our priests and fathers living up to the call that we've been given by God, recognizing we're all going to fall, of course, but we live in such a country of absentee fatherhood. I mean, in some communities, it's as high as 75%, where the dad's not even in the home. And that's really dangerous.
Yeah.
And it's really dangerous in the context of what we went through, especially with the sexual revolution as well. Because when you brought up this question for me, it was like my own father and my brothers and the guys that I'm around with in the locker room and stuff. I mean, I still struggle today with like chastity and purity of heart. And that, if I could trace it back, it comes back to my own sin first and foremost. But it's also like, and my dad, I look up to him more than any man I have in my life. And he's a great man. And now I praise with Jesus in heaven. But like going to a baseball game with him and him mention, something kind of crude about a woman that he saw and attract him, like, Dad, I'm 12.
Your mom's not going to watch this, is she?
Well, Mom, don't watch. I mean, my mom had her own struggles with, similar things with my dad. So it's nothing new. But like, that's certainly affected me to this day.
Yeah.
That I need to go back and like work on to make sure that I'm living the way that I'm supposed to. Because he was the man that I looked up to in every way, shape, or form. So if the men we're looking up to, aren't living as they're supposed to be living, that's going to impact us. But I think, and I hope that we can come to a place as a church where we are looking to our priests and we are saying, gosh, I really want to be like that. And for my kids, I want them to look up to me and say, man, I really want to be like Dad someday.
Yeah.
Like that's what it's supposed, that's the ideal that we're shooting for at the end of the day.
And I have found in myself to that end with any man that I have been disappointed by as an example, I find myself not even like on purpose. I've like stopped putting people on pedestals and I just expect that, you know what, even though I respect attributes of that person or parts of who they are, I'm pretty sure they probably suck just as much as I do and most other guys. Like, and I actually got into a little bit of a debate with someone recently with this idea that like, why are we expecting our politicians to be some kind of virtuous heroes? Like we're not asking holy priests to become the president. We're asking politicians by and large, until recently when we asked a businessman, but we're asking politicians to be, these decision makers for us. And, we've talked before, some of the exposure that we've had to the political world that most people don't get, that we observe a lack of virtue that is very exposing to like, we should probably have some different standards for our leaders. We want people to represent us. I don't disagree with, it would be great in an ideal for us to have virtuous leaders and for us to strive for that, but we don't really have those options right now. And that's so hard. Like everyone, okay, I'm imposing my stuff on this. I understand that this is not an objective reality, but yeah.
As long as you realize.
Yeah. Philosopher Kings, am I right?
Philosopher Kings, man.
But that's why we look to the saints, and that's why we desire to live saintly lives, because they lived those virtues and they fought through and they didn't give up. The term Israel, we call ourselves the people of Israel. That literally means to struggle with or to wrestle with God. Israel. And so, like, we recognize that we're not going to be perfect. We're going to struggle in this journey. But there are people who have done it, who have fought the good fight, who have finished the race, and they're the saints of the church. Yeah. And I think sometimes when we lower the bar and we say, well, he's a politician, he's not going to be that. Like, no, like, I'm going to hold my politicians to that bar, because if I set the bar low, then I'm going to get what is low. But if we set the bar high for men, then we push them to succeed. And we do that in athletics. We do that in every other category of life. But we don't do it when it comes to like being a saint. Yes, yeah.
You strive for excellence. You don't necessarily strive for virtue.
Oh, okay. I was like, what virtuous athletes do we have? Like,
you push excellence. Well, but that should be the goal. Is that like I do want virtuous politicians and virtuous athletes and virtuous businessmen. That holiness and virtue is not the camp of monks and priests. That's sort of something we keep going back to in the church, that we'll let these people be holy and we can just be normal. That holiness is the vocation of everybody, is important. I think it's just important that we have a realistic view and don't, and that we understand that no one person is the perfect embodiment of virtue, save for Jesus Christ.
Yes.
And so, because my follow-up to my comment before would be, now that I know, I know a ton of priests now, and there are a ton of priests that I look up to who are good and holy and faithful men.
Right.
And so it's not that that's lacking in my life or in anyone's lives. There are plenty of absentee fathers and fathers who are abusive and terrible. But there are also plenty of other fathers and father figures who are wonderful men. So I think it's just about having a realistic view that that no one but God is perfect. That everyone who we call a man is sort of
we fall short.
Yeah, we're not the man.
Yeah.
There's a difference between being a man and the man.
And I think that's the heart of what is kind of behind my wrestling with words to describe how I feel. But, I think my other concern with the politicians is it's so easy to then exploit the fact that we Christians get so excited by the notion of having a real Christian politician represent us. And, we've had a majority, we've had Christian and Catholic politicians leading, the country. And abortion is still legal, right? Like, I feel like we're getting exploited through our desire to have a virtuous politician. And then in the same exact way, Biden is suddenly a good and faithful Catholic. Like, what? And all they're doing is capitalizing on the fact that we want that.
Can I read Pope Benedict's quote?
Please.
So, holiness does not consist in never having erred or sinned. Holiness increases the capacity for conversion, for repentance, for willingness to start again, and especially for reconciliation and forgiveness. So I think there's a misconception that holiness is perfection, but holiness is like that perseverance, that willing for reconciliation to start again. And we see that even amongst the saints. Like, sometimes people, they want to talk about the saints, that person can't be a saint because the way they treated this group of people or that group of people is like, they were trying, they really were trying to be holy, and when they fall down, they got back up. And so that's very encouraging for me in my own walk, but I think that's relevant to what we're saying as well.
Yeah, holiness is not about perfection. It's about the pursuit of perfection.
Right.
So we have to have that striving for excellence and hold people to, like, that's the standard we're going for.
You can't pursue perfection
in the pursuit.
Unless you recognize your own brokenness. There's a humility there that you have to face up to. You can't be a hypocrite. You have to. Me too. I'm a sin. I'm a sinner.
Heresy.
We don't like ideals. I mean, I think our culture rejects ideals because, by their very nature, an ideal judges us. If I acknowledge a standard of excellence in any arena, that I'm judged by that standard. And so, even to get started on the path of self-improvement, of trying to be holy or trying to be a good athlete or whatever, I have to acknowledge, oh, they're there and I'm here. And that's all the more so when we talk about God, His holiness, which we're called to. It starts by accepting our brokenness. We can only build on that foundation.
And without meaning to it, we've hit the perfect description of who Jesus is, the man, because he describes himself as meek and humble. And earlier, without using the word meek, you were describing the need for men to be meek. So meekness is strength under control.
Yes.
Meekness is strength with discipline.
Wow.
And no one thinks of meekness that way.
That is a line. Give that to us one more time.
Meekness is strength under control. Or strength with discipline. And for some reason, whenever we hear the word meek, we think weak. And the linguist in me wants to know if it's just because they sound similar, or I don't know how it came to be associated with weakness. But to be meek is to be strong but under control. It was a word that was used originally to describe horses. So if you had a horse that was strong and that could pull a burden well with other horses, so they were disciplined and strong, you would call that horse meek.
That's fantastic.
Right? And so Jesus says, I am meek. I am strong and disciplined and humble. And I know, and humility is about the truth about myself. So it's not thinking too much of myself. It's not thinking too little of myself. It's being aware of exactly who I am.
Wow.
So if we want to be men like Jesus, we must be meek and humble.
So that is a perfect segue to the final question I want to bring, and I want Rob to give us the first answer.
Oh, gosh. I was doing a good job staying out of it.
This is a softball.
Oh, yes.
So if you mess it up, you must really suck.
Oh, yes. There's no.
You got this, Rob. No worries. I have no idea what he's going to say.
You're just starting us off. It's not. This isn't the end all be all.
You can change the question now.
No one's going to say anything after whatever you say. We'll just all agree. It's fine.
Shake your hand.
We got this. Yeah.
The question is, so we were just covering examples of failed examples of masculinity and kind of adjusting our expectations or whatever. Now, for us personally, for each of us, how can we become meek? How can we become good examples, healthy examples of true manhood, of masculinity?
You know, it's a good question. I think I was trying to think for a long time of all the bad examples, and I had a really difficult time because I have people in my life who are just crappy. They're just crappy. It happens. We all go through difficulties, but it's hard for them to really make an impact on me. Maybe I wasn't particularly close to any of them, but I go back to the beginning, my own father, and I guess he portrays himself. He's not a perfect person. It's very obvious, but I look up to him so much. He was such a good father. And for me, having not achieved this, what do you say, height of manhood, of being who you're supposed to be. I'm still working on it, but
well, that's the holiness. I mean,
the holiness thing, right? But I just think it's really important to have good examples, to look to those ideals, and to recognize where they're not ideal, to have realistic expectations. We have saints before us. We have good people to look up to. And, I think that's, certainly we have our perfect example of Christ. So.
What I'm hearing you say is, like, don't settle. Right, like it's so easy to fall into this trap of I am. Yes, it is what you're saying. Let me explain.
It just makes sense. It's fine.
What I'm hearing you say.
Never settle on anything.
It'll make sense. Yeah.
What I'm hearing you say is, like, it's easy to fall into the trap of I've arrived. Like, this is who I am. There's nowhere else to grow. There's nowhere else to, and even for a lot of Christians, and this is a big problem. It's like, well, I can't really improve at this point. I'm, 45 years old. I'm 50 years old, and this is who I am. Like, the journey towards the heart of Christ and the journey of striving for perfection, the journey of holiness and sanctification, like, we're not done till we're in the grave. Right. And so I'm hearing you say, like, look to the saints as examples and work, strive to be the best person you can be in any given moment. And it doesn't mean you're going to do it perfectly. It's that you're trying to, and using those examples that we can trust, like you were talking about the saints, like, for the love of God, don't try to be like President Trump. Try to be like a saint, right?
Barack Obama. Sorry.
But that's what I'm hearing you say is, like, we should never be so comfortable with who we are that we're good. Like, this is the best version of Nick you're ever going to get.
You could certainly extrapolate that from what I will say that.
And I have.
Can I speak to something else?
Please, yeah.
So you talked about the importance of, like, other men.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is so important, because as hard as it is to define manliness, you know it when you see it. When you see someone who's being authentically manly, you know it when you see it. But yet it's important not to mistake that man for the man, Jesus. It's important to still have the ideal without making your model an idol.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So you want to follow an ideal, not an idol. If you think of what an idol is, it's a statue that people mistake for a real God. And so if I look up to Nick as an ideal of manliness,
that would be the exception, because I really am weak and humble, right? Humble of heart.
So that's good, because you're a model. But if I make you an idol,
right,
then when you shatter because you're not the ideal, then my manliness is shattered. Then my ideals are shattered.
It's like the difference between having an older brother and a companion somewhere along the way, rather than, like, here's your.
Yeah. I was going to say Nick will shatter quite easily, but
wow! Why did I invite you here?
Somebody needed the lead prayer.
Yeah, and it wasn't going to be the priest at the end. So.
I go back to if we think of man in relationship, so who do we need to be in relationship with? And that's our Father. So if we want to be the men we've been called to be, it starts with relationship. It starts with prayer. Meeting God in those moments of conversation, of relationship. And then in discipleship, we follow him and we follow the church that he established. So we encounter him in the sacraments, we serve the poor, we care for others. And then as priest and warrior, we go out and we sanctify the world. So
Amen.
That's our model.
Amen. I love that. And I want to add, like, Tenny, you were talking about, like, you just know it when you see it, that I have a very practical example of that in Pete.
What a man.
You're all here because I see that in you. But Pete, I knew for a very short amount of time. We met in the course of, I think it was the spring of some year, not some year, it was the spring of 2012, the year I got married. And I knew him for a very short amount of time. And I instantly knew, this is a man I want to strive to be like. This is a man I want to learn from. This is a man that has so much to teach me. And I was not a student. So we met at St. Thomas More University Parish, where you are now a pastor. And you were the incoming campus minister, and I was the exiting music director or something like that. And we knew each other for such a short time. And I was like, babe, to my wife, not you.
No. Edit that part out. Super awkward. Edit that part out.
Keep it. I like it.
Edit that out to my wife.
I said to my then.
Said to Pete. Babe, go on.
I said to my then fiance, I said, I want him to be in our wedding party. Like, this is a man I'm going to journey with. You know, all these years later, we're each other's accountability partner. We talk to each other about the realest things. And I knew then, like, there's something about this guy that I want to be, you know, in a fraternal sense, I want to be intimate with him. And I think that that's what you're talking about, Tenny, is like when you see something, when you see a person that you want to strive to be like, it really hits you.
Yeah.
And every man in this room is someone like that for me. It's someone that I know I have something to learn from, right? It's someone that has the ability to tell me, Nick, you're wrong. Like, you know, Father, earlier, you were like, you know.
Happy to tell you.
Yeah. But not everybody's willing to do that. And that is a surprisingly and very sadly missing ingredient in today's relationships by and large. Is the ability to tell someone, I think that you're messing up here, right? One of my closest friends that is not in this room right now, I was in a very unhealthy relationship, and he said, Nick, I'm going to be completely honest with you. It's either that relationship or our relationship. I cannot sit by and watch you do this to yourself. And it's the willingness to push each other to sainthood. It's the willingness to push each other to heaven and help each other, lift each other up. So guys, this has been freaking great. This is exactly what I was hoping it would be. You've all been amazing. Any closing remarks?
Just want to say thanks, babe.
Alrighty then.
That'll do it.
Call it.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to the men's show here at Awaken Catholic. Teddy, you want to wrap us up with a little something about the Awaken Nation and Hallow?
So you can support what we're doing here on all the shows at Awaken Catholic. You have several hosts of different shows here, and you can go to awakencatholic.org and make a one-time or recurring donation and become part of the Awaken Nation. You can also support us and your own spiritual life and prayer life by downloading the Hallow app through our site, and that will get you 1 month of premium free. It's a great app. I know lots of people that use it, and it's making a big difference. So awakencatholic.org, hook yourself up, hook us up.
All right. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this session, this episode of the men's show here at Awaken Catholic. Join us next time. There we go. See you next time.
This show and all media on Awaken Catholic is made possible by the Awaken Nation and the Hallow app. The Awaken Nation is a community of people like you who support all things Awaken for as cheap as a cup of coffee a week and get access to exclusive content. Learn more by visiting awakencatholic.org/donate. Hallow is the only audio-guided Catholic prayer app focused on contemplative prayer and traditional Catholic meditation such as Lectio Divina, Daily Examen, and the Rosary. We here at Awaken all use Hallow every day and love it. To learn more or give it a try, visit hallow.app/awaken.